Josh McDaniels was the successor to John Gruden as head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders.
He looked me in the eye and he said, there's one thing. It was a fumble.
His career was always mired in controversy, from illegally spying on teams to backstabbing players and making their wives cry.
He didn't know how to talk to men. He didn't know how to be around men. He's an insecure little man.
In 2009 was when I got drafted. I remember meeting with him, and he was so arrogant, right? And I'm like, why is this guy so arrogant?
Because the opposite of it is Josh McDaniels. You have everything, but you don't have leadership, and now you're sitting on a 30 and 20-something record, and you can't lead men.
McDaniels claimed to have grown since his early attempt at head coaching with the Denver Broncos in 2009. But his second AFC West experiment with the Raiders was somehow more of a disaster. From coldly scapegoating and cutting 9-year franchise quarterback Derek Carr to setting the worst records in franchise history and being accused of drug abuse by an old friend from New England.
That Coke boy, baby. McDaniels be doing coke.
We have seen multiple star players shipped out for little to no value like Waller and Carr, or underutilized like Hunter Renfrow and Davante Adams, dropping them to the lowest lows of their careers. For a moment, there was delusional hope. Some Raiders fans defended every move by genius Josh, including a plot to scapegoat and dump Carr for Tom Brady. Apart from his struggles as a head coach, he's not the most relatable guy.
Favorite food?
I'm gonna say Boston Scrod. It's a fish you don't have a lot of places.
And he's kind of an asshole.
I have no anxiety.
That's right, okay, there you go.
You guys might have anxiety.
Is there...
I don't have any anxiety.
What?
You should have told me you're in
I'm not.
2 times? Yeah.
In the aftermath of some of the most humiliating losses in not just Raiders, but NFL history, McDaniels refused to give pep talks.
I don't think there's any big speech to give.
If you need a big pep talk or a big speech or anything like that, that's always a potential issue.
Instead, sounding like a clueless Mr. Miyagi.
You are what you do.
We're not the only team that loses games.
You can't really win until you stop from losing. Such is life in that regard. Football's a mysterious game sometimes. We have to be able to produce more points in order to win games in this league.
No one has ever fully exposed every single heinous act and serious allegation of Josh McDaniels in the Raiders post-Gruden era until now. He left a trail of heartache, lies, and failure in his wake. These are the awful allegations against Josh McDaniels. 2021, the year before Josh McDaniels arrived to the Raiders, was a year in which some of the most tragic events occurred for an NFL team in a single season. From character assassination of head coach John Gruden by, according to Gruden's legal team, the NFL and Roger Goodell, to first-round pick #1 wide receiver Henry Ruggs' deadly car accident that sent him to prison. Fans believe there would never be a season more gut-wrenching because of the high expectations ending in tragedy, despite scratching and clawing their way to the playoffs.
And I'm not ready to let go. I'm not ready to let go, no.
But the next season saw that heroic playoff team of 2021 dismembered, disrespected, deceived, and ultimately squandered away by one man and his delusional ego. In 2021, the Raiders reached the playoffs for the first time since 2016 under interim head coach Rich Bisaccia.
Raiders in, Chargers out, Steelers in.
Players like Carr and Max Crosby had a deep connection with Bisaccia and were vocal about keeping him as permanent head coach.
Rich is one of a kind. Everybody's been asking what's going to happen, and everybody knows my vote. And I made that very clear. I love Rich. I think he's the best man for the job, and he's come in and done such an amazing job. We've won 10 games with a team that's had tragedy, loss, everything you can imagine.
We're a good football team, and he got to take over, and we would love him to still be our head coach for the future.
They wanted to maintain continuity from the Gruden rebuild in 2018. The decision by Raiders owner Mark Davis to instead swing for Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels would disappoint the locker room. McDaniels, at the time, was a coach who was highly coveted mainly because of his rejection of head coach gigs with the Indianapolis Colts and reported assurance behind the scenes with Patriots owner Robert Kraft that he will take over when Belichick retires. Mark Davis saw his ability to pull McDaniels away from New England as a victory by Mark Davis. But the price would be steep. A 6-year, $60 million contract for Josh McDaniels and another lofty contract for general manager Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels' longtime college friend, Patriots colleague, and failed actor. New regimes with lengthy contracts typically indicate a full rebuild while making veteran players anxious. But Mark Davis quickly calmed everyone's fears, assuring them this was not a rebuild and that they were actively vying for the Super Bowl.
Now we're just moving to the next level, and that it's not a rebuild, it's not a reload, it's just taking this to the next level and getting to that Super Bowl and winning some championships.
McDaniels himself made sure he leaked to the media that he was excited about the current roster.
I feel Derek's fit on the team is as a player is obviously what we're looking for and what we want to try to build around.
There's no question that we have the capacity and capability of winning with Derek here. We all know that.
I think Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, the coach and GM, have always been fans of Derek Carr. Last offseason, when the Patriots didn't have a quarterback and we were wondering, was Gruden going to move on from Derek Carr? The Patriots were interested. They wanted him. And wow. Josh McDaniels, finally takes a job after like 8 years, took this job for a lot of reasons. But Derek Carr was one of them, because this was a quarterback that he could win with and that he has always liked.
However, as we eventually discovered through a series of unfortunate events, all these claims were complete bullshit. Michael Lombardi, the dad of Josh McDaniels' offensive coordinator, Mick Lombardi, would often run interference for the Raiders front staff and head coach, defending controversial statements and actions.
I know my son's the offensive coordinator, and people are saying, well, you're going to defend your son. That's not the case here. Look, wants to blame Josh McDaniels because Josh McDaniels was a shitty coach in Denver. Okay, well, it's a long time from Denver. Like, don't you think people change and they just want to dump all over Josh, right? Like, Josh is to prove himself to be a good coach. I'm not here to shill for him, but
Lombardi has always been more loyal to the Patriots than to the Raiders. He was once employed by Al Davis and apparently told Davis that Randy Moss had lost his speed and should be traded. Moss was traded to the Patriots and proved he still had his athleticism. Al Davis eventually smartened up and fired Lombardi. Warren Sapp shared the same story in 2023.
And I was sitting there with it. And Tom threw one of them deep bombs to Randy, and Randy ran underneath. He turned and looked at me and he said, Mike Lombardi said he couldn't run anymore.
Has Michael Lombardi always been a snake for the Patriots at the Raiders' expense? I wonder. This is why during McDaniels' tenure with the Raiders, we have always needed to pay attention when Lombardi makes comments like this.
So let's go back to when McDaniels comes in, right? Coming off a playoff year, Carr played well, threw for 4,800 yards, played well. If McDaniels walks into the building and says, I want to get rid of Carr, I need a new quarterback, that's not a good look, right? That's what happened in Denver. Got rid of Jay Cutler, all of a sudden everything went upside down.
The truth is, Derek Carr was a pawn in a more sinister plot that ended up completely backfiring. With 1 year left on his contract, Carr was looking for an extension. There was a strange delay between Carr and McDaniels' camp initially.
And at the same time, we got to try to do what's right for the team. There'll be a sweet spot in there, hopefully, for everybody.
Despite the fact that the Raiders had recently acquired Carr's old college buddy and elite receiver Davante Adams through a shocking free agency move.
It's a real special season for us. Hopefully see y'all out here and go Dogs.
It's Davante Adams down here, a.k.a. Big Uno Cinco. Last home game, undefeated at home all year. We need you. We need you to come down here and support us. We need you. We need you. We need you. Fresno Bulldogs, the whole team is grimy. Defense getting picks like Puffy in the 90s. DC throwing all the touchdowns. Corners can't guard me, so what you do now? This is the last few bars. Fresno State Bulldogs, yeah, we go hard.
Davante Adams had been longtime friends with Derek Carr after putting up historic numbers at Fresno State. They had trained together in the offseason even while Adams was with the Green Bay Packers. A golden opportunity aligned to bring Davante Adams to the Las Vegas Raiders, which Derek Carr, according to his brother David, helped make happen.
He tried to bring in his best friend, Davante Adams. That trade was dead. The Packers and the Raiders weren't going to trade. They got on the phone and made it happen. So he's bringing people in the entire time. Is he appreciated for that? No.
Davante Adams would later say repeatedly that Derek Carr was the reason he was a Raider.
You know, him being one of my really good friends, and you know the reason why I came here in the first place. I mean, I wouldn't be here right now if he wasn't here. So I think everybody knows how I feel about him.
The trade for Davante Adams brought hope for the entire fan base and the team. Adams would go on to hype up Derek Carr while comparing him to Aaron Rodgers.
The shift like from that passer to Derek Carr, and then just your acclimation too.
I mean, anytime you change quarterbacks from a Hall of Famer to Hall of Famer, you go Stabler to Rich Gannon or whoever you go to, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, and both are great players and great to be around. So I'm just enjoying that process. And
Davante Adams calling Derek Carr a Hall of Famer. Adams was looking for a stable situation with a clutch quarterback closer to home on the West Coast, and even turned down a higher offer from Green Bay to join Carr. Even though Carr was still fighting behind the scenes for his contract extension, the fact that the new regime picked up his best friend from college with whom he put up video game numbers seemed to indicate that McDaniels wanted him long term. Darren Waller trade rumors suddenly shocked the NFL world, as it later emerged that Waller had initially been part of the Adams discussion with Green Bay.
I trust the people that I've heard this from. I'm sure they trust the people they've heard from. I'm really confident that that's what happened.
McDaniels denied everything, despite it later emerging that they'd been shopping Waller since day one.
Darren's a really important part of our team. I've loved my time being around him. He's a Raider. He's going to be a Raider, and we're looking forward to what we're going to do together.
It would later turn out that was also complete bullshit. Carr finally secured his 3-year extension with the Raiders just prior to the 2022 draft, with many reporters lauding him for taking a Brady-type team-friendly deal.
And it's about as team-friendly and a nice of a team-friendly deal as you're going to find this day and age in the NFL. He wants the good team around, not selfish in the fact that he has to take every dollar in the world. He's a guy that's obviously said, whether I have $75 million in the bank or $150 million in the bank, my life doesn't really change, so I'd like to win football games.
Carr said he wanted to make sure they could keep everybody for their presumptive bowl run.
Tim, my agent, myself, and the team, we made sure, guys like Chandler, guys like Devante, guys like, hopefully, Hunter and Foster, and those guys can stay here. The way we're going to structure this is so that we can keep, everybody together and really have real continuity, really have something to build on, And so for me, it was like, how do we do that?
NFL insiders reported that McDaniels and GM Dave Ziegler convinced him to take a Brady-type team-friendly deal. Everything looked storybook, sunshine and daisies, except for one small detail: a 1-year out with no strings attached. The only NFL analyst who made note of it was known Derek Carr hater Mike Florio of NBC.
And the Raiders, if they want, can tear the thing up after this season.
And of course, me, WiFiWillie of YouTube. It makes me kind of upset, and it makes me kind of think, wow, like the Raiders made it seem like they're giving him the bag. Derek Carr made it seem like he's getting the bag, but it's really not what it seems. I was already worrying that something sketchy was afoot, but then I was browbeaten by my audience to trust the process and just be positive and don't be negative. Naturally, GM Dave Ziegler pretended it was merely a formality, and the idea that it would actually be triggered came from unethical media types looking for clicks.
How the contract was built and all those, different types of things. People can look into all those things and create different storylines. And the extension was longer than 1 year, and it was longer than 1 year for a reason.
It later turned out that, shocker, he was also full of shit. He actually was just using Carr to trick Adams into coming to Vegas to tempt Brady to take over as quarterback, thus completing the Patriots' total destruction of the Raiders. Brady wanted to humiliate Carr. We'll talk more about that in a second. The insane 2022 offseason also saw fan favorite players like Hunter Renfrow, an undersized walk-on at Clemson turned Pro Bowler, secure his 2-year extension of $32 million. Renfro was really good friends with Carr after being drafted by the Raiders in 2019.
There's not a better quarterback out there than Derek. As a leader, first off, just how he commands the attention of the whole team, what he does for everybody. There's nobody else in the world I'd rather have, and he has what it takes, and it's going to be awesome to go prove that this year.
His nickname was Third in Renfro because he always found a way to be open and roast DBs, once mistaken for Carr's younger brother by security.
Security guy, and Derek kind of says, hey, and looks in the window and says, hey, you got your son with you today. And I look at him and I'm like, do I look that young?
He would also casually bust out plays like this.
One of the best plays I've ever seen. One of the best plays I have ever seen. Effort, instincts, understanding the game, and making the play. This guy's an amazing football player, and I wish we had 4 of those guys. He's something else.
Josh Jacobs, the Pro Bowl running back and first-round pick out of Bama, was heavily disrespected in June after the Raiders declined his 5th-year option of $8 million. Of course, they also declined options for Jonathan Abram and Clelin Ferrell, though those two guys just aren't comparable to the value Jacobs brings. Most people justified the disrespect, saying that it's the Patriots' way not to pay bell cows and instead opt for a cheap committee approach. Regardless, this obvious disrespect to a seasoned Gruden grinder would come back to haunt them. McDaniels mostly shut out local press and beat reporters from covering practice, but they occasionally noted beautiful long bombs from Carr to Adams, witnessed through binoculars. The hype was real, the season ticket and merch sales were through the freaking roof, and the team looked poised for greatness.
Nobody likes losing, you know what I mean? So I know it should hurt when we lose. We all feel shitty, so, you know.
The Raiders immediately struggled and became the only team in the league to start 0-3. In week 2, Josh McDaniels set the wrong kind of records. He blew the largest lead in Raiders franchise history after leading the Arizona Cardinals 20-0 at halftime. This was also the first home opener loss since the Raiders moved to Las Vegas. One critical error by McDaniels led to a Hunter Renfrow concussion and fumble. At the 39-yard line of the Cardinals in overtime, during sudden death, only needing a field goal to win, the Raiders elected to throw it multiple times to an already banged-up Hunter Renfrow instead of using a top-5 running back, leading to Renfrow's concussion, fumble, and Cardinals' surprise win. It was in this week that we first learned about how controlling and restrictive McDaniels was with the offense, forcing Carr into predetermined throws instead of adjusting to defenses. The Raiders would continue to fight for wins despite the fact that they had to do exactly what Josh McDaniels wants. In week 3, the Raiders would lose to the Tennessee Titans, and McDaniels would prove his worth as a leader of men by condemning players for needing a pep talk. Seriously, are you kidding me?
I don't, you know, if you need a big pep talk or a big speech or anything like that to get yourself excited to compete at this level, you know, that's always a potential issue. I don't think there's any big speech to give.
After starting 0-3, the Raiders would end up 2-5 by week 7 and suffer another historic loss to the New Orleans Saints. The Raiders never passed the 50-yard line the entire game, and it was their first shutout, 0 points scored since 2014. This game also featured more ridiculous plays like a reverse to Davante Adams, who's not that style of wide receiver. It was after this week that we first predicted that Josh McDaniels would scapegoat Derek Carr and utilize that 1 year out in his contract.
I don't think Derek Carr is the problem, but I do think McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, if they want to save their job, they're going to probably want to have a scapegoat. And who knows if that will happen down the stretch if this offense continues to score 0 points in games.
Game after game after game, they lost in horrific and humiliating fashion, breaking some of the worst franchise records in Raiders and NFL history. In the aftermath of these devastating losses, McDaniels would make tone-deaf comments like, "We're not the only team that loses games."
Like I said, it's not unique to us. we're not the only team that loses games. And again, as hard as yesterday was,
Mark Davis headed down to the locker room to have an intense one-on-one with McDaniels after a couple of particularly humiliating losses. Fans had some hope that Davis would kill the Patriots' cancer before letting it spread. Unfortunately, Davis ended up publicly celebrating McDaniels for doing a fantastic job while at 2-7.
You gonna tell everybody Rome was not built in a day? That's got to be the dumbest quote that I've ever seen from an owner. It was stupid.
Personally, I'd prefer the sad years in Oakland over Rome, if by Rome he meant a failing knockoff of the New England Patriots. The theme of the Raiders in 2022 was blown leads. They became the first team in NFL history to lose 5 or more times in a season while leading by double digits in the second half. This odd predicament made fans and players anxious about Josh McDaniels' intentions. Was he trying to tank in the 2022 season? The losses in Week 8 against the Jaguars and Week 9 against the Colts is when players started to question what was really going on. In Week 8, McDaniels had odd behavior towards Carr on the sideline, and it looked as if there was a rift between the coach and quarterback. The same problems occurred. Adams was dominating in the first half and then mysteriously dropping off in the second. Adams said he didn't know why they got away from what was working.
I think that, the way we were attacking in the first half was working to a certain extent. Obviously, like I said before, we could be better, but it was working. And I feel like we got away from that and, started playing the game a little different.
After blowing yet another lead, the locker room was closed after the game. Davante Adams questioned play calling and coaching. In particular, Adams was surprised that they went away from what was working in the first half. Derek Carr appeared to be frustrated and seemed to be holding back what he really wants to say.
I think there's a lot I want to say, but if I'm honest, I don't need to say it here, and there's things that will be said. There are things that need to be addressed. After 30 minutes of football, we have to learn that the game is not over. New coaches or this or that, and you have to teach the new guys, like, this is how we do it, and this is the mentality, and this is and that gets tiring. But at the same time, it's my job. So
this is when reporters finally started shifting their focus onto Josh McDaniels and less on the players. But Mark Davis's public and firm commitment to McDaniels made any criticism of him effectively moot. Many around the league started to speculate that Carr would be the scapegoat and go on to test free agency.
I think it is time for both Derek and the Raiders, but all relationships, they're not all meant to last forever.
More and more people started blaming Carr for the disastrous season. We started to see reporters who used to praise Carr slander him.
Hondo Carpenter with Sports Illustrated. You get a double-digit 5th seed in the AFC West, but you also get a top 5 quarterback. How appealing was it for you to come to an organization with a quarterback like Derek Carr?
And Hondo Carpenter finds it relevant to bring up a book by Paul Gutierrez and Lincoln Kennedy, where Lincoln Kennedy trashes Derek Carr, says that he can be childish and immature, and if somebody says something bad about him, he sulks like a little boy who takes his ball and goes into a quarter. And so they're trying to paint Carr as not able to handle criticism, and apparently John Gruden never criticized him as hard in front of his teammates like Josh McDaniels, even though we have freaking video of John Gruden yelling at Derek Carr in front of the whole world on national TV in 2018 against the Arizona Cardinals. They claim Derek Carr thought the fun was being sucked out of the team, and McDaniels was relentless because McDaniels has a Super Bowl or bust mentality. Say that Tom Brady's different than Derek Carr. He's better than Derek Carr because McDaniels isn't one to coddle people, but Brady is harder on himself than anyone. The media started making Carr the focal point of the offensive struggles during this mid-season slump. Prior to the following matchup against the Indianapolis Colts with interim head coach Jeff Saturday, who had never coached in the NFL before, we thought, surely another historic loss like this would signal a tank job by Josh McDaniels. Obviously, the stacked Raiders roster, led by an offensive genius, ended up losing to a high school coach and TV broadcaster. Duh. This loss was so ridiculous that it finally broke Derek Carr.
Derek,
sorry,
continue.
To finish that, sorry for being emotional. I'm just pissed off.
He remained stoic the year before after losing his close friend and head coach, and after losing his #1 wide receiver in tragic fashion. But for some reason, this Colts loss finally made the possibility of Carr leaving the Raiders seem very real.
I'm just pissed off about some of the things, that a lot of us try and do just to practice. What we put our bodies through just to sleep at night. And for that to be the result of all that effort pisses me off. Pisses a lot of guys off. And I wish everybody in that room felt the same way about this place. And as a leader, that pisses me off, if I'm being honest.
Rumors circulated about who could be the object of Carr's ire. Who are the people who are not caring about this place? The next day after the game, Josh McDaniels, for some reason, had no idea who Derek Carr was talking about.
I think you'd have to ask him, more specifically, what he was or wasn't referring to. I've talked to Derek. I can't speak to what he was referring to specifically.
McDaniels seemed completely nonplussed from all the humiliating losses and zero explanation for why the players seemed on the verge of mental breakdown. Thankfully, McDaniels' puppets in the media got to work covering for him amid rumors he'd lost the locker room by accusing players of blaming one another. At one point, Vinny Bonsignore of the Las Vegas Review-Journal tried to spin Derek Carr's obvious frustration after the humiliating Week 9 loss to the Colts as Carr talking crap on Darren Waller for having a hamstring injury. Carr himself had to publicly debunk this mendacious bullshit. It's also noteworthy that Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, both put on IR after Week 9, remained off the field even after at times stating they were healthy and could play. Amid the disastrous season, there were a few bright spots, oftentimes occurring when players went rogue, meaning not abiding by McDaniels' plays or audibling out of them against the coach's wishes. Sometimes Josh Jacobs would run like he was on fire and just force the other team to relent. Players showed initiative in both of these departments, leading to a particularly awesome win against the Seattle Seahawks. Rumors swirled that McDaniels was angered by their insubordination. The Raiders ended up suffering more embarrassing losses in mysterious fashion, like losing to Baker Mayfield and the Rams despite the QB joining the team 48 hours before the Thursday night game and never practicing with them once. Even Baker Mayfield himself publicly questioned why the Raiders were in press man coverage late in the game, allowing Baker to easily take advantage of matchups and score the game-winning touchdown. Raiders beat reporters criticized McDaniels, but Carr ultimately ended up the scapegoat, and the 1 year out made more and more sense after each game. The Raiders would fall on Christmas Eve to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the second coldest game in Pittsburgh history. Carr was forced to throw it long multiple times when any genius knows you run it in sub-zero temperatures. This was odd considering Carr had his fewest passing attempts in a single game since his rookie year during the warm and sunny LA Rams game. Why would McDaniels not want Carr to throw the ball in perfect weather and then throw it long in sub-zero weather? Ultimately, the Raiders would neglect the run game, and Josh Jacobs, for his part, was irate that McDaniels didn't emphasize it.
I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm tired of dealing with it. Like, every day I come here and bust. I see the guys, bust their and the result is not there. To win these games, especially at the end of the stretch, especially when you up, against a team like this in the cold, you got to run the ball. So, that's a factor on everybody involved from top to bottom.
And then, on Christmas Day, genius Josh McDaniels decided to roll out the guillotine and put an unceremonious end to the Derek Carr era of the Raiders.
So they'll be out the remaining couple weeks this season. And had a good conversation with the quarterbacks this morning, and so we're going to go ahead and start Jarrett the last couple games of the season here.
Aside from a few occasional bright spots, the season amounted to only 6 wins and benching the franchise QB of almost a decade, kicking him out of the facility and banning him from the sidelines of the final 2 games. He wasn't allowed to say goodbye to the team, the training staff, medical staff, chefs, or even the freaking janitor. Raiders players, unsurprisingly, were irate at Carr's treatment.
I know a lot of people in that building who predated Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, the current GM. A lot of unhappy people with the way this was handled, including a lot of players on the team who have a lot of loyalty to Derek Carr.
Carr remained silent for a long time, but his brothers had his back.
All he did was go out and be the all-time leading passer in the history of the Raiders. Right? It wasn't Derek that changed, right? It was the Raiders that changed. I'm a little upset, all right? So that happens.
I know the Raider fans are excited to dig into this, to learn about what happened inside the walls in Las Vegas. We're excited to tell you.
Because players aren't allowed to say anything, especially when your coach is super strict on your social media usage and is super paranoid about the press, we had to find out about how angry players were from the NFLPA players survey after the 2022 season. Unsurprisingly, McDaniels was practically dead last in player satisfaction, not listening to them at all and making them practice twice a day despite losing almost every week. McDaniels hilariously responded to a question about his unpopularity with the players in true McDaniels fashion: deny, deny, deny.
Team report cards that the NFLPA put out, they didn't mention every coaching staff, but select coaching staffs, the really good ones and the really poorly rated ones. They mentioned, and yours was mentioned as not using players' times efficiently, and I think it said they felt like you don't listen to them, was what it said in the overview. Did you read that, and what was your reaction to reading that?
I heard it. I didn't read the whole thing. I heard it. I'm aware of that. Obviously, those things aren't, you don't like to hear those things.
We have since learned that McDaniels and Ziegler monitored players' social media accounts, suggested them to not talk to the media, despite the fact that they constantly engage in strategic leaks. Maybe if they would have focused on football more than their own petty vanity, they could have actually won games. When Carr finally broke his silence, he sounded peaceful and resolute.
You came up a little short. You think you can fix it yourself, and you think you're going to do it every single time, and you come up a little short, and I had to deal with that the past month. Forgiveness? Do they deserve it? Doesn't matter. He didn't ask me if they deserve it. He didn't ask me if they deserve that. That wasn't on the agenda for me. I really wish that, I could have helped more. I could have done better, right? Because that's how I was raised. I thought it was going to be different. Anybody ever had that thought? I thought it was going to work out different. It's easy to blame others. Trust me, I had a lot of family members trying to do that for me.
He wasn't going to let this petty little man bully him into retiring from the NFL. To the unassuming eye, it looked as though McDaniels was just disappointed with Carr's performance after believing in him and giving him a shot. But reports emerged after Carr was benched that McDaniels was not sold on Carr from the start, including as early as week 1 and possibly even during training camp. This totally contradicted all the McDaniels media leaks about wanting Carr since he was in New England, much less including him in their future plans for the Raiders.
Quarterback in Derek Carr that he has always liked. In fact, the Patriots considered trying to trade for Carr before the season.
But at this point, they didn't need to have a coherent argument against Carr because Raiders fans were seasoned pros in putting it all on DC and pouring their frustration into angry social media tirades against the humiliated quarterback. McDaniels knew he couldn't just storm into Henderson, Nevada, chew out Derek Carr, and pressure him to seek a trade as he'd done with the Broncos quarterback Jay Cutler over a decade prior. He knew the fan base was split on Carr due to exhaustion from losing seasons. Just let him choke with his #1 wide receiver and best friend from college, and the fans will roll out the guillotine. McDaniels wouldn't have to convince anyone of anything or look like he played any part in it. It was perhaps his only genius move, and it almost worked. After the disastrous season, the tanking speculation reached a boiling point. But why tank when you have great playmakers like Davante Adams and you spent so much on both sides of the ball? Buckle up, the saga is a twisted one. Dana White dropped an explosive bombshell right before the 2022 season.
I worked to put that deal together for Brady,
and Gronk to come to the Raiders. It was almost a done deal. And at the last minute, Gruden blew the deal up and said that he didn't want him.
And you had a deal orchestrated to get Brady and Gronk to the Raiders.
The deal was in the works for both of those guys to come play for the Raiders.
There were a lot of reasons why this news was shocking. First, everyone had always said Gruden hated Carr and wanted to dump him. We now know that's bullshit.
I can't express enough, how much I love, Coach Gruden. He's family to me. What he's meant to me in my career. Played my best football with him. Love him deeply like family. So, I can't express to you how much he means to me.
And second, we finally learned the identity of that mother. In reference to Tom Brady's mysterious comment on The Shop that an unknown team chose that mother over me?
They were interested, and all of a sudden they weren't interested at the very end. I was sitting there thinking, you're sticking with that mother.
Derek Carr was that mother.
That when Tom Brady went on The Shop, when he was saying at the MFR, he was sticking with you.
Yeah.
What'd you think of that? That people thought it was you and the Raiders.
From what I know, it wasn't me.
Okay, okay, that's good.
Which is good. And if it was, I've gotten in enough trouble trying to challenge some people to fight. I know you got the rings, but if it's not me, then we're good.
Yeah.
And maybe John Gruden never wanted Tom Brady, but Mark Davis definitely did.
And I can tell you unequivocally, this is a fact. The Raiders are looking into it. The Raiders are looking into going and acquiring Tom Brady.
Tom Brady back with Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas with Davante Adams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfro, and a defense that they won all in on. Is that the most obvious thing of all time? Is that what we're assuming is going to take place?
The Brady to the Raiders theory became so obvious due to Mark Davis partnering with him in the WNBA with the Las Vegas Aces. Even Derek Carr's brother David believed it.
The Raiders will have a new quarterback. Maybe it's Tom Brady. That was exciting, right? You guys enjoyed that the other day? That'd be fun. You guys do great.
Most NFL insiders assumed Brady was a lock this time, and many fans suspected that Brady was getting his revenge on Derek Carr after being rejected by John Gruden in 2020. The fan base was split on the decision to bench Derek Carr, but the Niners and Chiefs games at the close of the heartbreaking season filled Allegiant Stadium with red, drowning out what was left of the Raiders fan base that bothered showing up to witness the train wreck. The few who showed up came prepared with anti-McDaniels signs and were threatened and removed by the highest of the highs.
Long story short, security said it came from the top of the top. The sign had to get put away or I was getting removed from the stadium.
Fans felt like Mark Davis wasn't listening to them and that McDaniels was too weak for even the slightest criticism. The only consolation after the Carr debacle was a persistent rumor that we were about to get a celebrity at quarterback for whom the league might assist in a storybook Lombardi waving into his long career. The 2023 Super Bowl was in Las Vegas after all. Carr would go on to hilariously make the Pro Bowl that year, reuniting with his pals in Vegas and finally showing a glimpse of genuine hurt and frustration at the way he was treated.
After completely dominating the passing competition and scoring more points than anyone else, Derek Carr was interviewed afterwards and had an interesting joke.
Have you ever been that hot in Las Vegas?
Not that hot. It's probably why I'm going somewhere else.
The worst part is McDaniels slandered Carr through his media puppets on his way out, ludicrously claiming Carr was immature and could not handle criticism. This was silly to Raiders fans who'd witnessed Carr sometimes suffer through Gruden's tough approach.
Offseason, obviously, one of the big storylines was the question how you were going to react to Gruden, how he's notoriously tough on quarterbacks, and you said what? Just because you don't say the F word doesn't mean you can't handle it? Right. What's that relationship like between you and John so far?
It's absolutely amazing. The way he demands from me. He gets after me just like he gets after everybody else. If I screw up, he lets me know it in front of everybody.
NFL insiders speaking on behalf of McDaniels through strategic leaks, and some low IQ Raiders fans really believe the Raiders were going to get some kind of trade compensation for Carr despite Derek having a no trade clause. Albert Breer clearly echoing McDaniels' obsession with controlling media narratives, even went so far as to say it's better optics to be traded than released.
The reason Carr would want that is to save face and the optics of it, and it looks better if you get traded than if you get cut.
I don't care about the optics of it. Who cares? I can control that. I'm not just going to accept the trade because it looks better. I don't care about that.
Then Brady shocked the Raiders by retiring again. 2 weeks before Carr was officially cut. This put the Raiders front office in a difficult situation, and they shockingly actually tried to get Carr back. So let's get this straight. After slamming the guy for months, calling him out for poor character, blaming him for McDaniels' offensive struggles, they had such little shame and respect for Carr that they tried to pressure him to stay, using Carr's lifelong devotion to the Raiders against him.
My dad grew up a Raiders fan. He grew up right down the road in Santa Cruz, California. You know, his favorite player was Ken Stabler. He loved Tim Brown, so did my brother. And then as I was getting into it, you know, I love C. Wood. And so for my dad, for his son to play not only in the NFL, but for the team that he grew up rooting for, you know, I think that that's a really, really cool thing.
Keep in mind, this is after Derek Carr publicly admitted that the Raiders brass made his wife cry.
You know, once they made my wife cry, that was pretty much over. Like, once they made her cry, that was out. But the love for my teammates is what probably would have made me do it.
The Raiders would go on to get absolutely nothing for Derek Carr, even though, according to former GM Mike Mayock, he was worth first-round pick.
I took the phone calls for people trying to trade for Derek Carr, and he was worth more than a first-round draft pick.
The Saints were able to grab their franchise QB in free agency without giving up a single draft pick. Irate that Carr refused their insulting efforts to keep him, McDaniels' media puppets slammed Carr with new vigor. Michael Lombardi continued to rip Derek Carr even after he became a Saint.
Do you bet the over with Derek Carr and 10 wins?
No, I'm just saying I understand that they
I want it on the table. I want it on the table that you're not going to do that. I think that's important. You know, history says that typically he's never been this kind of guy.
Michael Lombardi obediently shaded every player with whom McDaniels had beef.
On the bye week, you went home and just didn't even talk to anybody. Just went home and left a message saying, hey, find me. I don't care. I'm going to Southern California.
This guy is saying that Darren Waller just straight up left, you know, and didn't rehab even though he was supposed to and didn't talk to anybody. But Darren Waller has just corrected the record and said that he had mandatory days off and even told Josh McDaniels what was going on.
The Thursday through Sunday, which were mandated to get off by the league, that was when I proposed to Kelsey. You know, I eventually told Josh, and that's how he knew and was able to tell the reporters that my wedding was happening.
McDaniels' beef with Darren Waller was particularly hilarious. Waller knew he was on the block from the time McDaniels and Ziegler unpacked their bags, so he was not surprised that he was eventually traded. However, the timing of the trade brilliantly showcases McDaniels' capacity for pettiness. Against Waller's wishes, McDaniels leaked to the press news of Waller's private wedding with Las Vegas Aces star Kelsey Plum, just for the hell of it. They also deliberately chose to trade him during his honeymoon, surprising them with the news that the Vegas couple will start their marriage as a cross-country long-distance relationship. Adding insult to injury, the Raiders only got a third-round pick for the man who in 2020 broke Tim Brown's record for the most receptions in a season in Raiders history. RG3 mocked McDaniels for making the obviously petty move. This prompted Kelsey Plum, Waller's new wife, to hilariously roast McDaniels' obviously personal motives behind the trade timing, saying, probably because he wasn't invited to the wedding. Burn roasted his ass. As we discovered from Raiders players surveyed by the NFLPA, Josh McDaniels refused to listen to players' concerns, and Waller was clearly one of these players.
Value our opinions here. As a player, I feel like a lot of places I've gone, it's, you know, you're told to do things a certain way, and you do those things. And coaches and players got to be in partnership. We're all together. It shouldn't be clashing with each other. We're all going in the same direction.
So the Raiders couldn't get Brady, couldn't bring back Carr, and this led to a couple of months of wild speculation about bringing in everyone from Aaron Rodgers to trading up for rookie QB CJ Stroud. Davante Adams was reportedly included in the QB discussion, and Ziegler said he took Adams' input very seriously. Adams lobbied hard on social media for the Raiders to pick up Aaron Rodgers, though he admitted it was mostly wishful thinking on his part. McDaniels ended this period of wild speculation with a whimper by announcing the signing of chronically injured QB Jimmy Garoppolo. Evidently, Adams had no idea they were even pursuing him.
Why would I not talk about having best quarterback to play the game and a guy who I have a lot of history with? So that's who I had on my mind initially. So, you know, that was never a slight at Jimmy. I didn't even know we were pursuing Jimmy.
So much for being included. The start of the Jimmy G era for the Raiders was already mired in controversy after Jimmy G failed to show up for his introductory presser, which was mysteriously postponed. At the time, common sense indicated it was a failed physical, though if you said that out loud, you were called a conspiracy theorist clickbaiter, or maybe that was just me. Raiders star players like Adams and Jacobs seemed clearly bummed out by the QB signing and Waller trade, making fans concerned. The Jimmy G signing and being left out of the QB conversation clearly led to deteriorated relations between Adams and McDaniels after The Ringer published their bombshell interview with Adams, in which he admitted he did not see eye to eye with the Raiders front office. Adams clearly regretted his moment of honesty, posting a friendly pic with GM Dave Ziegler, but the damage was already done. Adams tried calling out the media for pursuing sensational clicks at his expense.
I don't ever want Jimmy to feel a way, think that I didn't want him here, or I don't like him, or I don't want Josh to feel like, I post a picture with Ziggs and then they're like, oh, is it Josh that that must be the real problem. Y'all can do that if you're that bored, like go play Monopoly or some shit.
Instead of Monopoly, maybe a more fitting game would be Jenga, because everything would come crashing down. Fast forward to Memorial Day, and shocking everyone except this channel who called it a month and a half earlier, news broke that Jimmy G had in fact failed his physical. Not only did he fail his physical, but his left foot was still actively broken and in need of surgery. This signing could only have been more disastrous if McDaniels had broken Jimmy's foot himself. Rather than simply void the deal, McDaniels was so desperate that he still signed him. But they wiped away all guarantees through a new addendum G, making his contract depend on the left foot healing before the season. But McDaniels did his best to calm everybody's fears by mocking them.
I have no anxiety.
Right, okay, there you go.
You guys might have anxiety.
Is there...
I don't have any anxiety.
The Raiders front office had a hard time moving on from Carr. McDaniels was so filled with petty rage that he saddled newly drafted 4th-round quarterback Aiden O'Connell with the imagery of donning Carr's number. Once again, McDaniels disrespected another player by using the gracious young man as an insulting prop instead of letting O'Connell start fresh with a number that held unique meaning for him. Even the Seahawks chose to rest the number 3 for at least a year after Russell Wilson's departure, to show some respect and avoid unnecessary drama. But Carr continued to live rent-free in McDaniels' mind. Training camp was off to a sloppy start, and McDaniels' media friends seriously tried to blame Carr for Jimmy G's interceptions. Seriously.
Guys that know a lot more than I do, being respectful of them without throwing their name out there, that let it be known that, hey, there was some instructions that in training camp you don't go intercept the quarterback because you don't want to mess with his confidence. I don't think that's the case with Jimmy.
It's not the case with Jimmy. You're allowed to pick off Jimmy G, and so the reason why Jimmy G has substantially more interceptions than Derek Carr in training camp so far is because we previously weren't allowed to pick off DC. The Raiders did not want to evaluate cornerbacks. They did not want to evaluate safeties, so apparently we were never allowed to pick off Derek Carr. Apparently it wasn't allowed with John Gruden. August 2018, Derek Carr talks about his first pick in training camp. August 2020, 2021, and it only takes a few minutes to discover that this claim is complete bullshit. After Jimmy G obviously struggled, McDaniels got to work selfishly protecting his own image from the next scapegoat. All of this sudden, McDaniels said he really didn't know Jimmy G that well, so McDaniels really wants to hammer home that they did not get him because he was there in New England, because he didn't play much for him. The familiarity is overblown, and they just grabbed him because he's a great football player, and he always did great things out there in San Francisco, even though San Francisco seems to do well with any quarterback at this point, especially lately. And that they barely worked together in New England, the quote-unquote scheme fit is overblown, thus undermining the Raiders' rationale in pursuing Garoppolo in the first place. Before the season even started, McDaniels was already insulating himself from the inevitable criticism of his hand-picked free agent. The Raiders brass also found a way to publicly disrespect Josh Jacobs for the second year in a row.
My sense is that the effort was really made. They made a very strong effort.
Oh, apparently Josh McDaniels just tried so hard to keep
keep Jacobs.
The Raiders have tried to be as communicative as possible with Jacobs.
So Breer is trying to say that the Raiders tried really hard to negotiate with Jacobs, and they've been very communicative. But what we hear coming from Josh Jacobs and what we hear from his friends seems like it's the exact opposite of what Albert Breer is saying.
I seen Josh Jacobs, and I'm talking to him about the contract situation. He said the Raiders did not even offer him a contract. Whoa.
So Breer is trying to say that they tried so hard, but as of 2 weeks ago, the Raiders never even offered Josh Jacobs a contract. And by the way, Slim Jim Skinny Boy Breer, how can the Raiders have been very communicative with Josh Jacobs if they have never even offered him a contract?
What are you talking about? You don't offer the best running back last year a contract at all?
So they'd previously declined his fifth-year option, even shopping him in the 2022 preseason by playing him against third stringers. But Jacobs rose to the challenge of heading into the season with no guarantees and became the #1 rusher in the NFL. Instead of rewarding him with the 2 to 3 year deal, they imposed the franchise tag and repeatedly lied about trying to negotiate with his agent while they were in fact ghosting them. Due to the blatant disrespect, Jacobs was the only running back to be forced into holding out and missing training camp. Low IQ fans blasted him all summer long for being greedy, and Jacobs would occasionally do the Lord's work by telling them to shut the f*** up. During the 2023 NFL Draft, the Raiders had the #7 overall pick. With players like Jalen Carter and quarterback Will Levis still on the board, the Raiders instead elected to pick injured edge defender Tyree Wilson despite already having 2 highly paid starters. We suggested the night of the draft that this was proof that McDaniels and Ziegler were planning to move on from Chandler Jones, who was underwhelming the year prior. Jones was signed in 2022 to a massive contract at age 33. Little did we know there was a much deeper problem brewing behind the scenes. 6 days before the first 2023 regular season game, Chandler Jones declares war against GM Dave Ziegler and head coach Josh McDaniels.
You spook me? Man, TMZ hit my phone, man. Your boy got pictures, text messages. McDaniels, Ziegler.
Jones made wild accusations about McDaniels, from substance abuse to very serious crimes that we cover more deeply in our video, The Disturbing Chandler Jones Allegations. What evidently set Jones off was the fact that they locked him out of the facility without any notice, forcing him to work out in a public gym, thus jeopardizing his injury guarantees.
Him to not be able to go to the facility is beyond bizarre. This is one of your best players, and you won't let him in the facility to work out. You don't want him working out anywhere else because he's not covered. So if he gets hurt somewhere else, he's going to go on the NFI list, the non-football injury list, and not get his money.
The Chandler Jones situation doesn't totally fit here because it seems like Jones was dealing with a legitimate mental health crisis. Still, if a player is going through all that, you might not want to enrage them and ghost them. There's probably a better way to de-escalate the situation with a player you've known for a decade, signed to a massive deal in your coaching debut, and conspicuously drafted his replacement in the first round. The result of this communication failure is Jones accusing McDaniels of and on Instagram Live.
Such is life.
Such is life. Such is life.
But amid some of the wilder statements from Jones, most Raiders fans could agree on a couple of his statements.
Get McDaniels the f*** out of there. Hunter Renfrow needs the ball. He's a God-fearing man.
Everyone knew Hunter Renfrow was on the trade block, especially because he was never targeted. In the first 2 games of 2023, he only had 1 target even though he was healthy. The Hunter Renfrow saga in the McDaniels era of the Raiders is one of the saddest. He was one of our favorite underdog stories, an undersized walk-on at Clemson, made fun of by all, but shutting everyone up once he took the field. Even the NFL media started to take notice of his talent.
Renfro's going to be the next Julian Edelman, the next Wes Welker, because remember, Dan, the New England Patriot passing game was not about the vertical. Sure. It was more horizontal.
Renfro did not look like his old self under McDaniels, and the situation got so bad that he entered a bit of a depressive slump after the season. For the first time since being in Vegas, he moved back home during the offseason to be with his family in South Carolina. Rumors swirled that his relationship with McDaniels was irreparable, and the head coach was looking to dump him ASAP. Raiders reporters even grilled Renfro instead of the coach on whether his differences with McDaniels were related to the scheme or something more personal. Weird questions by the Las Vegas Review-Journal about him fighting City Hall, feuding with the coaches.
Ever get to a point where you figure out I can't fight City Hall, I just gotta kind of do what I'm being asked to do, or is there an appreciation where okay, I see where...
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that, I want to paint that narrative that we were tension, we were fighting, It just takes time to learn offense.
Renfro, always the polite professional, sought to keep the peace. After months of delusional hype for Jimmy G, the Raiders' offense performed far worse than anyone could have ever imagined. As much as the offense struggled the year prior under Carr still assisted Adams in having his second best career high in both yards and touchdowns. But in this 2023 season, Davante Adams at one point only had 142 yards in a 4-game span, his lowest since 2015 during his second year in the league. Jimmy G, despite missing 2.5 games, still led the NFL in interceptions through 8 weeks. Jimmy G had 3 interceptions in a single game against the Steelers, his highest in a single game since 2018.
I think Jimmy's not worried about it, and I don't think Josh McDaniels is worried about it.
Josh McDaniels, who had previously given Carr his worst statistical season, was now doing the same to Jimmy. In 2023, McDaniels was the only head coach in the league to never score more than 21 points in a game. Technically, McDaniels' offense never scored more than 19 points in 8 weeks since the defensive points finally broke 20. Despite the Raiders' record being a not terrible 3-5, the losses were so humiliating and the wins so not convincing that fans lost all patience. Mark Davis probably wished he was still dealing with last year's relatively peaceful fans donning anti-McDaniel signs, because this time around, they were out for blood.
McDaniels, you fucking suck! McDaniels, you suck! You suck! You suck, McDaniels! You fucking suck! Fuck McDaniels! Say it again. Get rid of Daniels! McDaniels! Get rid of Daniels! Hold on! Get rid of Daniels! Smarten up. Get rid of Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels has to go. Smarten up. Get rid of him.
Davis was confronted by multiple enraged fans demanding that he produce McDaniels' head on a pike. Davis himself began echoing fans' frustration with the coach, at one point clearly calling him an asshole on primetime television. If you thought Raiders fans were upset, Davante Adams was positively irate. Even if Mark Davis had initially hired Josh McDaniels under the auspices that it would lead to Tom Brady in the silver and black, it was clear that McDaniels overestimated his relationship with the future Hall of Famer. Despite Davis promising McDaniels and Ziegler a 3-year minimum leash on a 6-year deal for a rebuild in the Patriots' image, genius Josh likely suspected his time was coming to a close. The fact that the Raiders didn't trade Hunter Renfrow by the October 31st deadline, something that was obviously in the works for months, was the dead giveaway that Davis was pulling the plug. Mark Davis loved many of the Gruden grinders from the 2021 playoff team and likely did not want to see yet another star player's value, along with Davis's own money, squandered away for little to no gain. Instead, he chose to stop the nihilistic bleeding of talent by canning Josh McDaniels, general manager Dave Ziegler, and offensive coordinator, not really, Mick Lombardi on Halloween night. They benched devout Christian Derek Carr on Christmas, officially cut him on Valentine's Day, and now were themselves fired on Halloween. A week prior to the firing, the team apparently had a long overdue team meeting in which Raiders players all aired their grievances with McDaniels. Oh, to be a fly on the wall watching McDaniels grimace and fidget. The only thing that changed was the offense somehow got worse, only putting up 7 points that week. Right before the game, Mark Davis also held private meetings with players like Davante Adams, Josh Jacobs, and Max Crosby. It's hardly a secret that Josh had completely lost the locker room starting during the 2022 season, no matter how many beat reporters try to gaslight us into believing the opposite. All of the concerns we had throughout the past year and a half ended up being 100% valid. All of the delusional attempts at consolation, Raiders have sucked forever, let's try the Patriot way, Josh McDaniels is a genius, Jimmy G is just a winner, Jimmy is an upgrade over Carr, have finally been disenchanted once and for all. Honestly, I started to doubt myself and thought that perhaps I had a toxic approach to covering McDaniels, criticizing his every move through a series of YouTube videos with his silly faces plastered plastered on every thumbnail. Was I just sour about the fact that he ruined the Derek Carr and Davante Adams reunion from my hometown of Fresno that was supposed to materialize in the NFL with my favorite team, the Raiders, in storybook fashion? We never got the storybook ending. On this channel, I covered McDaniels' mistakes while the rest of the mainstream media and team beat reporters mostly ignored him, choosing the easier route of blaming the players instead. If my YouTube coverage played even a small role in ending Josh McDaniels' time with the Raiders, I will gladly wear that badge of honor. Goodbye, Josh McDaniels. You were never a Raider.